Welcome to the MLB Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo at JGilbo11, taking a look at the 7:05 and later games tonight. Pretty sizable slate. There are some early ones to go in. So this is at noon o'clock here in the afternoon. So if you haven't already, go play some early games. It's a pretty fun slate. But looking at the 7:05 games, Rays Orioles, that one jumps off right off the bat here. 8.5 over under. So looking for some offense there. And really, I'm kind of looking for it more so on the Rays side. And I think there are some interesting bats to talk about here in Baltimore just because you got the lefty Drew Smyly on the mound. Obviously, Machado's in play. Yes, he does hit right-handers a little bit better than lefties, but still kind of even things out a little bit last year. Newly acquired Mark Trumbo, great GPP play. I think he's finding cash as well, hitting in the heart of the order, going up against Smyly there. So Smyly, 324 WOBA allowed to right-handers last year. It's acceptable to being hit hard. Obviously, Camden Yards is a pretty friendly park. You look at Smyly, allowed 11 homers and 51 innings to right-handers last season. He does have trouble keeping the ball in the park at time, and Camden Yards obviously the more friendlier spot. One of the reasons I'm not hooked on the Baltimore Orioles tonight is I think if Adam Jones sits out, it's not an appealing lineup outside of two guys there. If Jones comes in, hits in the top of the order, I think you can look at a decent stack, just depending on what they kind of do with that lineup against the lefty there. But looking at the opposite side of that game, you can take a look at Mike Wright, who's on the hill, struggles against left-handers. Camden Yards pretty favorable to lefties. You can look at Corey Dickerson, who's definitely an intriguing play. I still don't mind Longoria. Obviously, 1 yard last night for you BVP guys against Chris Tillman. But, I mean, Longoria is off to a decent start here in the year. The guy can, hit below average pitching, which Mike Wright is. I think it's definitely a play to keep in mind there. Outside of that, I mean, those are really the names I'm taking a look at. Dickerson's in a pretty favorable spot. I think he's a safe play in both formats. Machado, I can't see myself paying up for him at that price tag in comparison to some other names at third base tonight. I think he's more of a GPP play. But outside of that, I mean, you definitely can run Trumbo out there. He's pretty cheap. I like him a lot. I think he's a great candidate to go yard tonight against Smyly. He has elite numbers against left-handers. He's shown that. Now he's in a better ballpark, not in Seattle anymore. So I definitely like that call there. 7:10, we are looking at the Houston Astros and Milwaukee Brewers, 8.5. You are looking at Willie Peralta and Doug Fister, so this one should be a fun one. Obviously, lefties have crushed Willie Peralta over the previous years. Looking at last year, 376 WOBA allowed. Guy struggles to keep the ball in the park at times. Unfortunately, I mean, Houston doesn't have a ton of consistent producing left-handers, but you can look at Colby Rasmus, Luis Valbuena, two guys, Jason Castro if you want a punt catcher. Miller Park favorable. Now you got Willie Peralta on the hill. I think those guys are nice spots to produce some value, especially if you're going with the nice core stack, which we'll get to in a little bit, just because there are some expensive guys on the mound. And I was talking to the pitcher pod, if you pair up Cole Hamels and Bartolo Colon, you got 4,000 left over, and Bartolo Colon's going against the Phillies there at home. So you got 4,000. You slip a couple value guys in, you can still pair up a couple of Coors bats there. So definitely something to keep an eye on. Even though, I mean, Carlos Correa, he's probably the only right-hander I'm really targeting in this matchup. Correa is just on another level. And Willie Peralta, I mean, he's done well against right-handers at times in his career, but not struggled last season, 349 WOBA allowed. You definitely usually target lefties against him, but a guy like Correa, Springer coming off a bad night, he's a GPP pick. So look for this one to be a pretty favorable spot for offense goes on both sides, because then you got Doug Fister. He's allowed a 368 WOBA to right-handers last season. Fister does not miss many bats. And even lefties, 317 WOBA allowed, not bad, but not great either. You look at Domingo Santana up top in that lineup, Chris Carter, GPP pop, Ryan Braun as well, Scooter Gennett, pretty safe cash game play, hitting in that 2-hole. So Jonathan Lucroy, not a bad catching option as well tonight. So I think you can look at those guys, top of the lineup there for Milwaukee. Both sides, pretty favorable spots. Vegas expects that one to be pretty high scoring, 8.5. So I'm all over that one right there. 7-10, over under a 7. So Vegas isn't expecting a ton of offense. If anything, I would look more on the Cardinals line, just with Tyrann struggling with left-handers. Carpenter coming off a really down night, struggling out of the gate here so far, but gets a favorable matchup against Tyrann, who allowed a 386 WOBA to lefties last season. He did have home and away splits, but I still think you can take some shots at this Cardinals team. Matt Adams on that left side. He probably will get pinch hit for late in the game, which is concerning. Makes him kind of only a GPP play from me. But if he can do some damage within his first 2, maybe 3 at bats, you like him a lot tonight. So especially at that price tag, and you're looking at the Coors game, doesn't offer really a first baseman. So he can slide into those lineups as well. Outside of that, not too much. The offense has been really struggling for St. Louis out of the gate here, and pretty much all the bench players have been the one to do the damage. So on the Braves side, I'm a big fan of Carlos Martinez, so I'm not really picking on the Braves. I think you can look at some of the lefties. You look at Freddie Freeman as a GPP play because Carlos Martinez led a 329 WOBA to lefties last year. He does a good job of keeping the ball in the park, and Freeman not really a big power guy anyway, so he's kind of an interesting swerve off some of the big names tonight, but and a guy who I'm not going to get crazy with. Other 7-10 game, Phillies and Mets. I think the Mets are an interesting target tonight. They are heavy favorites, -177.5 over under there. You can definitely look at guys like Cespedes. I think overall this is a team that Leska struggled with right-handers last year, and just a small sample size, 349 WOBA allowed. I don't mind a guy like Cespedes who's hitting cleanup, going to be in great RBI spots. I think he's going to be completely off the radar tonight, so I do like him in tournaments. Outside of that, I mean, you can look at Neil Walker at a pretty weak second base position. But, I mean, outside of that, there's not a lot that I'm in love with. I think on a full slate like this, with the Coors game, a game at Citi Field just doesn't have that much appeal. I talked about Bartolo Colon on the pitcher pod, that he could be a fine SB2, won't be touching him on FanDuel, unless you're just trying to be completely off the grid and maybe tossing the multiple lineups. So staying away from that one. Looking at the Twins and Royals, 2 pitchers on the hill that have been friendly in the past, 2 hitters, more so Tommy Malone. Ian Kennedy has struggled keeping the ball in the park. But, I mean, you're looking at Kennedy, 356 WOBA allowed. Struggled mildly with lefties last year. Gave up a ton of homers in that friendly Petco Park that was nice for left-handed bats. But now he's in Kauffman Stadium. You got Lorenzo Cain out there patrolling the center field. Nothing drops when he's out there. I don't mind him as a GPP play tonight. Talked about him a little bit. He does have the ability to miss bats, and you're looking at a pretty favorable strikeout matchup against Minnesota, who has a ton of pop. And if you're looking at Minnesota, not a ton of power from the right or from the left side, so that is something that kind of puts me in more favor of Kennedy tonight as a fine GPP play. But he still struggled with right-handers last season, 338 WOBA, still gave up homers. So I really do think you can look at Dozier and kind of hope those numbers carry over into this season. Dozier, Sano still in play for me, still pretty cheap on FanDuel for the most part. Outside of that, I will head over to the Kansas City side and look at that offense, because you're looking at Tommy Malone, who, I mean, has really struggled against right-handed bats as a lefty throughout his career. A lot of 331 WOBA to right-handers, gave him a ton of homers. So really, I mean, you can look at Lorenzo Cain. There's some decent GPP value. Salvador Perez, Cetas Escobar up top, Kendrys Morales even. I think those are all fine plays. Lorenzo Cain should go completely off the grid tonight just because you got a Coors slate at hand. He's priced up there. Of course, because you got Matt Kemp and some of those other names. So I do like Lorenzo Cain. I think he's a nice pivot off of some of the other popular plays like Ryan Braun, Delson Cruz even. So this is a guy who just mashed southpaws last season, and he has stolen base upside, can hit for power. drives and runs. He's in a favorable spot in the offense, hitting third. So I'm really looking at Lorenzo Cain as one of the top plays tonight. And I think you can plug him in all formats. I think you're going to get him at a fairly low ownership. I don't think it'll be anything too low because I was off on Starling Marte last night. I thought he was going to be a little bit lower, but he ended up being in like the 20s. So Cain looking like a decent spot. And as I mentioned, Kendrys Morales, Alcides Escobar, and Salvador Perez all in decent spots as well. So moving on, and here we go, 8-10, Padres, Rockies. If you're new to MLB DFS, the ball absolutely flies out of Coors. There's always a ton of runs. It can turn good pitchers bad. It can turn bad offenses good. It has magical powers. I don't know what it is out there, but it's definitely that thin air up there being a mile high. And really, I mean, I'm sure fans actually probably think they're a mile high watching Trevor Story right now absolutely tee off on hitters. And you got to look, I mean, he's a significant discount from Carlos Correa right now. I mean, he's just 3,900 on DK, and this guy's Babe Ruth at this point coming into the season, just mashing homers in each game. And also on FanDuel, I mean, a $900 difference from Correa. And I think Story's going to actually be the very chalky play on tonight's slate, as he should be going up against the lefty there. So you can look at Pomeranz, who allow 326 WOBA, two right-handers, guys like Arenado, DJ LeMahieu, who against the lefty the other day led off the game against Patrick Corbin. I think you're going to see that continue tonight. But Nolan Arenado hitting fourth. He's in a good spot tonight. Mark Reynolds is a guy who has hit lefties at a decent rate. Ryan Rayburn, he's a guy who's matched left-handers as well, but going to be pinch hit for probably late in the game because you're going to look at Parr coming out of the off the bench to face a right-hander. So you're kind of hoping for a little bit of a shot with Rayburn. Hopefully he gets it done in those first two at-bats. But still, he's one of the cheaper Coors plays. He's still expensive, but he's still one of the cheaper Coors plays. I really have a hard time paying up for him in cash if he's not going to get 3 or 4 at-bats because he is still 3,800 on DK and 3,200 on FanDuel there. So he's going to be around other nicely priced outfielders who are going to be playing a full 9 innings and are in good spots as well. Of course, they do lack the Coors air, but still, I think he's better suited for GPPs, to be honest. So really, Arenado, LeMahieu, those are guys that are in solid spots. Story, obviously. On the Padres side, going up against Jorge De La Rosa, lefty. He's a guy who struggled, in Coors at times. He's done all right on the road. A lot of 328 WOBA to right-handers last season. Padres offense against lefties, it's not favorable, but they do have some guys like Matt Kemp, Will Myers, Derek Norris, Yangervis Solarte, even Lexi Ramirez if you want to get a little bit weird with your lineup. I don't hate it just because he's pretty cheap, but he's 100 less than Story on DK. That's just absolutely wrong. I'm not sure where he didn't get priced up to. But Alexi Ramirez, 3,000 on FanDuel. He's hit lefties at a decent rate over his career. Kemp is kind of your big man on campus, but he does carry a pretty high price tag. He does have a decent stretch against left-handers. He's kind of slumped his previous years. Of course, no one's going to thrive in Petco or thrive with the Padres, but I think Kemp comes in as a top option tonight. He's going to be a pretty chalky outfielder, even though he is one of the top price guys on the slate. Will Myers, interesting play. He is first base and outfield eligible on DK. He's a first baseman on FanDuel. Expensive. I mean, the guy's been on and off. I think he's priced around some guys that are not in good spots, but I still think they're going to have fair ownership anyway. Just looking at Anthony Rizzo going up against Greinke, Chris Davis, obviously in that lefty-lefty matchup isn't ideal. Prince Fielder, Garrett Richards. So Goldschmidt, he's a guy to keep an eye on at first base, but I think you are looking at Will Myers as probably being the chalkier first base option. So game's going to have a ton of runs, get some exposure to it, 10.5 there, but be wary of those platoon splits I mentioned on the Rockies side. So 8-10, looking at Cubs, Diamondbacks, 8 over-under, Zach Greinke and Kyle Hendricks on the hill. Rather attack Hendricks on the Arizona side, like Gene Segura there. I like David Peralta. I like Goldschmidt. Not paying up for Goldschmidt in cash games, but overall, I think he's a pretty safe play. Um, Peralta, one of my favorite options on the slate because you're looking at Kyle Hendricks really struggled against left-handed bats last season, a lot of 343 WOBA. So David Peralta is going to come in as one of the top options for me, sitting at a pretty decent price tag. He's come out of the gate pretty hot here to start the season. The guy absolutely crushes right-handed pitching, so he's one of my favorite options. Outside of that, there's not a ton of lefties. You can look at Jake Lamb as he got GPP target at third base. He's absolutely dirt cheap. He does have some pop in that bat. Can launch one over the seats. Chase Field's pretty favorable. As far as picking on Greinke on the Cubs side, I don't think it's the way to go tonight. The guy is 100% healthy after coming off the flu. And, yes, the Cubs have added some bats like Zobrist and Hayward there, so there's going to be a hell of a lineup to get through for Greinke, but I don't think there's going to be enough there to justify their prices. I think you can kind of skip over them there. Rangers and Angels, this is another one. Just an over under a 7. I like both pitchers in this game. Hamels comes in as one of my top options on the night. A little bit of rain in the forecast. Not going to be a ton of offense on this slate. In this game at just 7. You're looking, Mike Trout's always in play, always a GPP play. Guy crushes left-handers. But overall, you're looking, those two guys, him and Pujols, are the only options, and even Pujols right now, kind of on the end of his career. This lineup is atrocious. So I look for Hamels to get through this thing with a breeze. I'm surprised the Rangers are underdogs in this one, but you can put Garrett Richards in that GPP area. As far as the Rangers side, I'm not really looking at too many guys. I think Richards is one of the tougher pitchers on the slates. He made it really tough on left-handers last season, allowing a 279 WOBA. Just a 299 on base percentage. Even right-handers, just a 309 WOBA, so I don't expect much out of this game. I won't even be taking any shots at some one-offs and GPPs. I think it's just going to be a low-scoring game to target. Looking at the 9-10 game, over-under of 8, although it is Safeco, things can be tendered down. We thought we were going to see some runs last night. We did a little bit. The A's have some pop in that lineup against a guy like Nate Karns, who yes, he's moving out of the Trop and moving into a pretty favorable park in Safeco there. Karns had a decent year, a lot of 308 WOBA to lefties, so not too bad. 306 WOBA to right-handers. I don't mind him against this Oakland team as an SP2 on DK there. 8,500 is a little steep for him. I do see him picking up the win tonight. I don't see him striking out a ton of batters just because Oakland doesn't anyway. So he's a guy to keep an eye on. But looking at the Seattle bats, Ketel Marte is a decent cheap shortstop option. Came through with a couple of knocks last night in RBI. Nelson Cruz going up against the lefty Rich Hill. Obviously, Rich Hill resurrected his career for 3 games last year against Boston, with Boston. And then, you got to deal with Oakland. But still, overall, Rich Hill has been fairly up and down throughout his career. I still like targeting a guy like Nelson Cruz, Franklin Gutierrez, Chris Iannetta, all hit lefties very well. Yes, they didn't last night against Skurkamp there. So I think you are going to find them at a little bit lower ownership than maybe last night. I still think they're a favorable spot. Now you get that core slate that's on in the night game. It's going to definitely lower tons of ownership around the league just because everyone's going to be focused on there. So interesting pivots. I think Cruz is still at a pretty cheaper price tag. I think he is going to be a little lesser owned, just 4,300. And when you got Matt Kemp for 4,000 facing lefty and cores, it's going to probably draw his ownership down to quite a bit. So definitely an interesting swerve there. Outside of that, you're not looking at too much from that game outside of a couple of Seattle righties. Kyle Seager's actually hit lefties pretty well, but still, I think I'd rather pay up at the hot corner, looking up at guys like Machado and Nolan Arenado, and even taking a shot at Sano there as far as GPP goes. So overall, really stack up on cores. You're looking at the Royals side of things. You can look at the Mets side of things. That Astros Brewers 8.5, that's going to be a fun one to target. I think all those guys that I mentioned there will be top options. Corey Dickerson, a couple Baltimore righties there. Trumbo Machado, if Jones plays, keep an eye on those guys. They're all in good spots. And check out the pitcher pod, the pitcher nail down. If you're looking for my takes on pitchers today, talk about some guys. Obviously, I mentioned Cole Hamels being the top player of the night and a few GPP picks here, but I go into more detail over on that podcast. So that's going to wrap things up with the slate breakdown. Check out dailyfantasycafe.com for all our great tools and content.